Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Maricel Mirabal, and I am the CHCI UFCW Public Policy Fellow. I am delighted to be with you today for our Path to Equitable Justice, Supporting Returning Citizens and Their Communities session. This summer, I truly got to see what the harsh reality was like for returning citizens. I interned at a nonprofit organization in my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania, called Brooks Connections Pretrial Services, where we aided returning citizens with transportation, finding housing, securing employment, and fulfilling basic needs. These organizations are extremely necessary given the current barriers within the reentry process, such as ethnic or racial discrimination, community-level socioeconomic disparities, and much, much more. On behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank Altria Client Services and Latino Policy and Politics Institute, UCLA, for their generous support of this session. It is now my pleasure to introduce welcoming remarks from Angela Arboleda, Senior Director of Federal Government Affairs at Altria Client Services. Angela is the Senior Director of Federal Government Affairs for Altria Client Services, which provides professional services and supports the Altria Group and its operating companies. Angela previously served as Senior Advisor for then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and worked for civil rights organizations, including Unidos US and the National Organization for Women, where she worked on equality and criminal justice issues affecting diverse communities. Angela serves on the Board of Directors of CHCI. So let's welcome Angela Arboleda.
Thank you, thank you. So you may wonder, why would Altria, who is the parent company of Philip Morris USA and other adult products, be hosting or be sponsoring such an event, such a panel? And the answer is very simple. First of all, I really, really care about this issue. I've been working on this issue for the past 20 years. And when Altria decided to hire me, I said there needs to be a focus on criminal justice reform at this company, and I'll tell you why. And then we started talking about prohibition versus harm reduction. We started talking about the need to give voice to local community-based organizations and formerly incarcerated individuals and really bring them into the fold. And so I learned a lot about what the company was doing around harm reduction. And I said, we should care about criminal justice issues. And the bottom line is that we do care. And over the past 3 years, we have committed over $5 million in making criminal justice one of our main priority issues. Thank you. And this is very near and dear to my heart because I started my career 20 years ago on these issues. I was the only Latina working on criminal justice reform issues. I was just talking to my colleague who I haven't seen in 10 years, but 20 years ago we were young and we were working on these issues when nobody really cared about these issues. And 20 years ago, I wrote a book about Latinos in the criminal justice system and how we were invisible for the criminal justice system because data was not disaggregated. And what that means is it wasn't separated by race and ethnicity. And so it looked as though we weren't there. And so I wrote a book with some professors at the University of Michigan, and we said that we were actually overrepresented in the criminal and juvenile justice system, but we were not being seen. And obviously, our community had other barriers, including immigration and language barriers. And so that was very, very important for us. This is 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, when I worked at NCLR, which is now Unidos US, I said to my boss, who's the founder of the organization, we need to care about these issues. And he said, ay, mija, we have so many issues to work on the Latino community, education, immigration, health. And I said, and we also need to talk about criminal justice reform issues. And so little by little, we made it happen. And it is part of the agenda in a major Latino organization, and it is part of the agenda here at CHCI. And so without further ado, let me leave you with a great panel, because we need to understand that criminal justice issues have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I know that our moderator will talk about that, but I am very proud to be a part of this panel and to have my company be supportive of this great program and of the issue, which means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you again, Angela. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Keisha Middlemass. Keisha is a resident fellow at the Brookings Institution and an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Howard University. Her research focuses on public policies, race, and the impact policies have on marginalized communities. She is the author of the award-winning book, Convicted and Condemned: The Politics and Policies of Prisoner Reentry. So please welcome Dr. Keisha Middlemass.
Thank you, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon to talk about such important issues. I do want to thank CHCI for the invitation and want to thank Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee for sponsoring this panel, though she's not able to be here in attendance. But wanting to echo the previous two speakers that the issue of the criminal legal system is huge. It impacts everybody. Even if you don't know someone who's impacted by the criminal legal system, you are still part of the system because we pay taxes. And we talk about for-profit prisons, but even the state-sponsored United States prisons and the federal system, the state prisons and the state systems, they're sponsored by our tax dollars. So you may not think you're part of the system because you haven't been arrested, incarcerated, or know a loved one that has re-entered, but we are all part of the system because we live in the United States. I just always like to set the tone, like this is not just this faraway issue, because it is near and dear to millions of people and millions of children about who was arrested, who was charged, who was incarcerated, then who then must re-enter. So without further ado, I want to introduce this fabulous panel that we have with us this afternoon. My far left is Paul Barragan Monje. Paul serves as Director of Mobilization at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute, which is a co-sponsor of this panel. He is responsible for leading advocacy efforts to achieve equitable policy outcomes. So we're thinking about race equity, economic equity, and to improve the living and working conditions of Latinos and communities of color. Previously, Paul worked for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and served as the Director of Policy and External Affairs at Compass Family Services, a nonprofit agency supporting homeless children and families. Please welcome Paul. Celia Colon is to my immediate left. She's a talk show host and producer of Powered by Pain on JD3 TV, and is an Emmy Award nominee, an author, an educator, and inspirational speaker. She's a progressive national social justice expert. Celia is also a systems-impacted individual, and she is CEO and founder of Giving Others Dreams, a Chicago nonprofit organization that provides direct reentry services and holistic support for justice-impacted women. Everybody, please welcome Celia. Last but not least, in the middle, is Ileana Pujols. Ileana is a policy director of the Connecticut Justice Alliance. She is a 2017-2019 Youth First Initiatives Youth Leaders Network alum, a 2019 Connecticut Public Allies alum, a 2019 to 2021 Annie Casey Foundation Youth Advisory Council alum, and she is a 2021 World Congress on Justice with Children and Youth Adversary Group alum. Please welcome Ileana. If you're on social media, the hashtag is hashtag CHCIHHM22. And people are like, what? CHCIHHM22. All right, so we are going to dive right into a series of questions. And as was intimated by the speakers, the criminal justice system has multiple layers. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're going to think about these stages in the questions, so we're really differentiating between what does it mean to be incarcerated, what does it mean to be then coming home, but also what leads into being arrested and incarcerated. So for everyone, and please, I'd like to start with Ileana. Take 2 minutes to share with the audience about the work you do, its application to the criminal legal system, and why it matters.
So I've been working with the Connecticut Justice Alliance since late 2017 when they started their Youth Adult Partnership. The Connecticut Justice Alliance has been working to decriminalize kids for over 20 years now. So anything from raising the minimum age of arrest, getting kids out of adult facilities, making sure that we're reinvesting dollars into communities based on what communities ask for, not what we think they need, et cetera, et cetera. We started the Youth Adult Partnership because CTJA, which is the alliance, my job, was doing that work for all those years without even having conversations with people who were actually in the system or impacted by the system. So we felt like, or they felt like, because I actually came on board as a starting member of their partnership, that in order to be able to talk about how we need to abolish the juvenile justice system, how we need to reform things, we need to be having people who have actually been impacted by those systems at the decision-making tables. And since then, we've been functioning as a Youth Adult Partnership. I started as what we call a justice advisor, which is a young person who has either been incarcerated, on probation, expelled, pushed out, the school to prison pipeline, whatever it may be. I started as a founding member, and then since there, eventually became the supervisor, and then eventually brought on another justice advisor to take on my role. And I'm now the policy director. Thank you.
Thank you. Celia, please respond to the same question. What would you like to share with the audience and its importance and significance?
Yes. So first, honored to be here. Thank you for this space and everyone that's here to listen. This is something that impacts all of our lives. So I've been justice impacted my entire life. I have an uncle who's serving natural life that I still remember at the age of 4 being traumatized by the COs checking me in to go see him. I myself went to jail at 17. I went to prison at 18. I did a 15-year bit. I've been home now for 21 years. And because of all of the harms, because of all of the things that I witnessed, was a part of, and faced myself, I am one of the many faces of prison rape that people don't like to talk about. This is something that stays with your soul for your entire life. There's nothing that could ever change that experience for me or for a lot of the women that go through this. Coming home to no supports, okay? Incarceration has always been a male thing. A lot of the programs, the funding, the supports, they're all geared towards men. Why? Because yes, men are incarcerated by larger numbers, right? Mass incarceration, 13th Amendment, we all know at the end of the day, it's just slavery until we can abolish the 13th Amendment, where they allow free labor in the prisons. So when I came home and had no supports, I thought about all the women that I left behind who had a story just like me or even worse. And I said, who goes back to help them? Who goes back and shows them the way? Because even though it's a system, there's also a system to success. And it's about learning that new system, that new lifestyle. The work I do is very personal for me. I lost my little sister last year. A day before her birthday, she was shot in the head. Again, protecting women has been my life calling. I tell people, I just started the non-for-profit a year ago, but I've been doing this work since 2001. I've been going back behind the walls. There's not enough supports, and we gotta remember that when we protect women and we support women, we're supporting and protecting the next generation. How can a mother who is broken raise confident, just these amazing children, right? They're supposed to flourish and grow up to be doctors, scientists, lawyers, whatever. But if the mother is broken, so are the children. The children are even more broken when they see their mama broken.
Right, thank you. So we're gonna dive into a lot of these separate issues. Paul, as a policy expert at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute, can you set the stage for us about the Latino community, the criminal legal system in the United States? Because we're talking about numbers. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts.
Sure, happy to. And I just want to start by expressing my deep gratitude and honor to be sharing the stage with such exceptional, powerful, consequential women leaders in our community, mujeres, that I'm deeply inspired by. So it is really a joy to share the stage with you today. And so I'll briefly, just quick intro to UCLA LPPI. The Latino Policy and Politics Institute is a multi-issue public policy think tank that's focused on the democratic inclusion and civic participation of the nation's diverse and growing Latino communities. And so when we think about the American criminal legal system and the criminal justice reform movement in particular, Latinos are not always thought of as an immediate or an obvious stakeholder group. But when we look at the data, I think it speaks otherwise. And I want to clarify once and for all that criminal justice issues are Latino issues, and Latinos have a direct stake in how these policy conversations unfold. So when we look at the American criminal justice population, Latinos represent a substantial and growing portion of the incarcerated population in the country. Latinos today are about 18% of the total US population, but we account for over 23% of people who are currently incarcerated in state and federal prisons. So this is a percentage that has actually increased over the last decade, despite the fact that the overall population in the carceral system has been decreasing over time. When we compare Latinos to other demographic groups, Latinos in the carceral system are relatively younger than other racial and ethnic groups. There was a recent report by the Department of Justice that noted that 42% of Latino men between the ages of 18 and 34, 42% of Latinos within the criminal justice system were between the ages of 18 and 34. So these are young men and people who are in their most productive years who are still being detained from their families and from their communities. There was another recent report by the Department of Justice that studied recidivism rates. It's important to think about what is the reentry back into the carceral system look like. This report looked at across 24 different states from the point of release, and it followed individuals over a period of 10 years. And it found that among Latinos, 44% of Latinos who were released were rearrested within 1 year of being released. And as we followed this cohort over a period of 10 years, 79% of Latinos who had been released were rearrested. So this shows the abject failure of our government and of our society to provide the meaningful supports in housing and education and educational opportunities to ensure that people have the resources that they need, that they have a fighting chance to successfully return to their homes and to their families.
Thank you. So I always like to take an opportunity, just as my colleagues on the panel have done this, to educate the audience about what is being done. But I also like to then provide a little snapshot before I jump into the next set of questions. So when we're talking about the criminal legal system, we're talking about it's an incarceration of over 2 million people, men, women, and federal, state, local jails, ICE detention centers, and it's a variety of different types of incarcerating institutions. And the best way to decrease this number was not COVID, but it's decreasing the number of people going into the system. And I say that instance about COVID because you would think that would be the one that prisoners would be released. And Department of Corrections were like, no, pandemic's not important enough to release people. So if it's not a pandemic that's going to release people, we really got to focus on reducing the number of people entering the system. So, Ileana, based on your work, particularly with Latino youth, which echoes what Paul just said about the young age group of Latinos that are now incarcerated, can you tell us and share with us the challenges young people are facing prior to entering the criminal legal system?
So one of the things that we've been doing at the Alliance is these things called vision sessions, where we'll go into facilities, programs, community spaces, and we'll have conversations with young people, facilitated by young people, about what happened, right? What led you into the system? What could have went better? What could have prevented you from going into the system? Where did you need support where somebody had failed you? And we ended up creating a whole report about it. Long story short, we had pulled 7 common themes from those discussions. And these were things like housing insecurity, economic insecurity, lack of trust in the system, right? Kids talked about not having positive role models or mentors. The people around them they're learning the skills that they have from the people around them, and they're looking for other people around them, but they can't find them, right? So we're talking about real life issues. I think one specifically that I've seen with Latino young people, and again, just through conversations from the vision sessions and just personal relationships that I've had, is one, absolutely language barriers. Even when it comes to communicating with staff in schools, staff in facilities, courtrooms, wherever it may be, there's always some sort of language barrier, whether they don't understand your dialect or they just simply do not speak English. I think another big thing, and this is just, and I don't even know how to put this in the best terms, right? But for example, one day I was sitting down having a conversation with a young girl who had got into an altercation, and she was trying to explain to me, like, oh, you know, they essentially said, like, I'm too white to hang out with this group, but I'm not Hispanic enough to hang out with this one, right? I'm a pura Latina down to the core, but one group doesn't accept me because I'm not Hispanic enough for them, and one group doesn't accept me because I'm too Hispanic, right? I've seen that come up specifically with girls, not with boys. Girls get into a lot of arguments with that in the high school that I've been working at. And then just overall, right, the general problem of not addressing trauma. These kids are coming from communities, families, et cetera, where their mothers have been extremely poor, their grandparents, right? Parents have been incarcerated. They're essentially repeating the same exact cycle that their family members are repeating, and it's never being addressed. So I think that's been a really big one that I've seen. I imagine, since I know some of the questions, some of that will come out, so I'm trying not to say too much.
You're doing great, and when we get to the other questions, you can expand on things or go into a different direction. Celia, based on your expertise working with women, your experience being an impacted individual, share some of the challenges Latinas face that leads to being involved with the criminal legal system.
Well, first, which we all know, right? The lack of opportunity that exists in my community, the lack of economical development, the structural violence that exists in my community. When you talked about COVID, the first thing I thought about was a structural violence. So I live in South Chicago, a very underserved, I think the medium salary is like $30,000, very poor community, right? When COVID hit, everything closed down except the liquor stores, the plasma center, and the pawn shop. And if that isn't structural violence to me and to you, I don't know what is. So that right there just sets the tone for the children that are watching what is essential, what is important to us as community members. And that right there leads to a lot of the insecurities and the housing issues. For women in general, there's not enough supports. The thing is, even in 2021, in some spaces, we're still not even being paid the same as our male counterparts, right? A lot of rooms that I go into when we're talking about who's at the table, I'm usually the only one that looks like me. For me, it's about the lack of opportunity, and not just the lack of, the constant, I would say, cycle of destruction that the system likes to keep poor Black and brown and white poor people in, right? So there's this system that is meant for us to stay where we're at, right? Especially for women. When you think about it, women are the primary caregivers, usually. About 86% of us are the primary caregivers at home. So because of that, we wear all these many hats, right? Chauffeur, we're the cook, we're the counselor, we're all these things. But when it comes to support or having a job that is really providing the lifestyle that you would like so you could be a soccer mom, right? It's not available. A lot of women turn to criminal activities to support their children. If your child is hungry and, they're crying, you got to do something to feed them. And sometimes it leads to criminal activities. So instead of getting to root causes as to why someone got to this point, we want to just label you and punish you for the rest of your entire life. For generations to come, people are stuck in this very hurt, very destructive system for generations. Because when I have barriers, so do my children. When I can't have opportunity, neither do my children. That's what I think leads to a lot of things.
Thank you. So because we're also concerned about policy, like how do we respond to these structural challenges? Paul, what do you think are like 2 policy initiatives that would assist youth and women? And as the 2 previous speakers just said, we help women and youth, we're helping the entire community. So really all people. What would be some initiatives to prevent or decrease the number of people entering the criminal legal system?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So focusing a bit on the youth segment, there are a number of really important campaigns at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level that are seeking to expand Latino and multiracial history and curriculum within the K-12 public education system. So there are programs like ethnic studies. There are policy proposals right now that are seeking to eliminate bans on books written by authors of color, which does exist. It happens in states like Pennsylvania. And these initiatives are really important to support young people in schools to be able to identify themselves with their school communities, to feel that there's relevance there, that there's a sense of belonging there. And there's mountains of data, decades of research that points to the importance of belonging and how that is positively associated with increased graduation rates, but also decreased rates of interactions with the criminal justice system. So we also have to be very, very clear about our commitment to abolishing the school to prison pipeline and eliminating zero tolerance policies within schools. So these policies are often justified as classroom behavior or behavior regulation methods that are on their face seem as unbiased or objective, but these are deeply, deeply subjective, racially biased practices that for many students ends up contributing to the first interaction with a police officer on school, and that is the entry point into the criminal justice system. So we have to be absolutely committed to working out these issues from the very beginning of the pipeline, and often it really starts with police presence in schools. And we know that when police officers are on schools, that does not contribute statistically to increased feelings of public safety. It does not prevent the incidence of school shootings, unfortunately. And if anything, it aggravates the risk and the likelihood of harms done directly on students of color in our schools.
Thank you. So unfortunately, when individuals are caught up in the criminal legal system and they're incarcerated, they are sent miles to a different part of the state. In Illinois, it's downstate. In New York, it's upstate. In Texas, it's rural communities. And that means that individuals are not incarcerated close to their family. So their family must then struggle in multiple ways to visit them, to stay connected, because we know that's really important on the reentry side. Ileana, can you tell us some of the challenges that youth encounter when they are incarcerated far away from their community and their immediate family?
I don't know if you're gonna like my answer. I think some of the challenges, right, are obviously disconnection from family. We're talking about low-income families. Essentially, they don't have transportation. Essentially, they have not only one job, but sometimes multiple jobs, right? Multiple kids to be managing at home, needing to figure out who's gonna watch the kids so I can go visit my child, how am I gonna get to go visit my child, right? All of the logistical complications that come with that, which we should all be well aware of. I do think that sometimes the location gets in the way of progressive policy. Why I say that, for example, in Connecticut, we were able to shut down our last youth prison in 2018, right? So now we have baby prisons is what they essentially created, right? And they're supposed to be home-like, community-based. They're closer to the communities we're talking about. In Connecticut, specifically Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, right? Where the diversity happens. But now we're looking to get kids out of the adult facility and move them into the custody of judicial. So, they're away from the adults, out of DOC care. And the big argument is, but we can't find anything close to the communities. You guys wanted something close to the communities. If we move the kids out, we have to move them further. Which is why I said, I don't know if everybody will love my response, because although there is a benefit to the facilities being close to home, let's also be realistic about where we're putting the kids in. And sometimes close to home doesn't have enough land or space to create something that's gonna be not only productive for your child, but that's not gonna replicate a prison or a jail. And in my state, close to home means smaller spaces. You don't have field outside. They're not gonna knock down neighborhood homes to go and extend the field or the yard for you, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes the farther spaces are better because also we have kids that are scared to stay in their community, especially if it's a residential where they can essentially run at they can run, right? And I'm a no kids in prison person, so this isn't me saying, I'm pro-prisons or pro-incarceration. But just being mindful too of sometimes the kids also wanna disconnect from those communities. If they run, they could get shot literally leaving the residential. Right, so it's just there's 100% many challenges that come with that. And then I also think we cannot ignore the benefit sometimes, and not even speaking from my own perspective or experience, but speaking from what I've heard from other young people.
I just want to pause there and reinforce this idea of looking at the pros and cons of policy choices. Like we always think, oh, this will be good for them. This is a progressive policy, like you said. This will be good for youth. We're removing youth from adult prisons. But that does not necessarily mean good for the individual that is moved. That it's always reinforcing what everybody's already said. It is so important to talk to the people that are impacted by the system to find out how the system is treating them, because the people who create the system and implement the laws sometimes only think about the large numbers, the masses, versus what does it happen to that individual. Same question to you, the idea of women, the increasing percentage of women women are the fastest growing percentage of those that are incarcerated. And that means mostly Latinas and Black women. White women trail in terms of the numbers that they're incarcerated in comparison. But when you start thinking about women that are incarcerated away from their families, communities, you already said they're the major breadwinners, they're the primary caregivers. Talk about the challenges they have when they're inside.
Well, first, 97% of the women that get locked up come home. So they will be your neighbor. Remember that part. Secondly, inside, many, many moons ago, but I still deal with the prisons. I'm inside the prisons. I was the only person allowed via Zoom when COVID happened to talk to the women. So I hear their cries. Things haven't changed. It's not like the system decided not to use punishment as, as their source of correction. But there is no corrections in corrections. That's what you need to first understand. There's no kind of rehabilitation. Yes, there's might be a school. There's a social worker for like 500 people on one wing. So if you think you're going to get any kind of therapy or help, it's going to be from your fellow people that are there. A lot of the challenges women face leaving the system, like I said, there's not enough supports. But when we think about women and men and why women keep going back, so when women come home and a man comes home, let's me and Paul be the people, right? So we come home, same crime, same offense, same time. We come home, they don't ask him if he's a father, if he's a primary caregiver, but they'll ask me. They'll know it already. So I'll have all these mandated things that I have to accomplish before I can get custody of my children again, right? Unlike Paul, he's not going to be questioned. He's not going to have to go through the things that I have to go through. We go to the same warehouse to get a job. We get hired, but yet I got to turn around and tell my boss who just hired me and Paul just got hired, but now I got to take off once a week for the next 90 days because I got to go to mandatory DCFS visitations for my children. If I don't go to that, DCFS thinks I don't want my kids back. You can't dangle my kids in my face because my kids are always going to win. So the job that you gave me means nothing to me. So now when I go in front of the courts, I look very irresponsible to the courts because I can't keep a job. I keep losing my job. I have to do all these mandates, not just parenting classes, DCFS supervised visits, anger management, alcohol and drug evaluations. Even if you weren't there in prison for an alcohol or drug case, you still have to take it. And then getting the kids counseling and getting yourself counseling, right? Because women do face a lot of sexual harassment, a lot of dehumanization behind the walls, unlike men. When you think about, when I'll talk about myself, 25 years ago, the ratio of the male CEOs and female CEOs, it was 98% male CEOs, right? Officers, correction officers, not really many females. Now there is. That alone creates, right, this weighted scale of here we are, right? So the harms that happen when women come home and they have to do all of this just to get custody of their children again and to get housing. How are you going to even get an apartment if you keep losing your job? And if you're dealing with DCFS and you have 3 kids, then guess what? You need 3 bedrooms. And who's going to have a 3-bedroom apartment with $15 an hour? It's not happening. So women are losing their children, especially Black women and brown women. They're losing their children by the boatload, okay? They're losing them to a system that doesn't care to help families I'm losing my train of thought here. Reunification of families doesn't exist. That's what I'm trying to say. There's no supports for that. So women coming home face many more challenges and less supports.
Thank you. So, unfortunately, the United States, since its founding, is a incarcerating country. It is a policy that is just the way the United States works. Paul, what are some policy alternatives to incarcerating people? Because other countries treat those that are convicted, they treat them as citizens of the country that will then reunite with the community from which they are incarcerated from. Norway, Sweden, a lot of European countries, yes, they're predominantly white. They don't have the racial history that the United States does. But there are alternatives. We don't have to incarcerate people.
So there are a number of really exceptional programs and interventions across the country at the state and federal level that are really focused on decreasing the arrest, the conviction, and the incarceration of Latinos by really pivoting sort of the focus on how we think about public safety and justice and what that actually means. And so I'll highlight a couple here, and I'm happy to share a few more of these best practices with other folks. So there are what are called pre-filing diversion programs. So these are programs prior to the point of an official charge being issued. The city of Santa Monica in California has a partnership with the Santa Monica City Attorney's Office, with the police department, and a nonprofit that provides, that identifies individuals who are eligible for this program and connects them directly to substance use services, mental health services, and housing services in lieu of any formal charges being issued. So these are programs that today are keeping people out of jail by instead putting them on a path to recovery and support. So that is prioritizing rehabilitation, right? Which is what allegedly many of these institutions, criminal institutions, fashion themselves as doing. There are also supervised release programs in other parts of the country. In the city of New York, the Center of Court Innovation operates a really exceptional supervised release program in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, and in Staten Island that instead of having people serve time in jail, it is connecting people to a network of services and allowing them to undergo pretrial supervision. So in the city of New York, the majority of people that are currently sitting in jail are there because they're awaiting trial, and largely because they cannot afford bail. So what these pretrial supervision programs do is they provide a degree of monitoring, of support to support people in being able to reach their court dates and to meet those commitments, but ultimately get the resources that they need to be successful in the long run. So there are a number of alternatives throughout the country that are really focused on this idea of true rehabilitation, of true empowerment, and that show that we can have successful alternatives to incarceration.
Thank you. So setting the stage for reentry is really important, and they've all implied this. Over 96% of individuals that are incarcerated in the United States will be released. So I talk about the 2 million people that are incarcerated, except for maybe the ICE detention centers. 96 of those that are incarcerated in state and federal prisons are coming home at some point. They already live in our community. They're already family members, and we probably don't always recognize that. But people are going to be coming home. So Ileana, what are the challenges young people, those 18 to 25, or even captured by Paul's data, 18 to 34? What are the challenges they face after they have been released and reenter the community?
I think everything that Celia touched on 100% applies to a young person who is coming out, who is a parent, who may have been pregnant when they went in, right? All of those things. So I think one, absolutely everything that Celia was saying. I think the second piece is it depends what time the kid went in, right? Essentially, you might have a kid coming home who doesn't even know how to socialize the same way that he would have if he was still in high school, right? You have kids losing skills in social interaction. They don't know how to manage money. They don't know how to apply for a job. Now working out of high school, I have 18-year-olds who don't even know how to read, right? So it depends where they're coming from, at what time are they coming into the system, how long are they in there, what programs and services did they receive while they were in there, right? Because if not, then these kids are essentially transitioning out with no skills at all whatsoever. I think another big thing is sometimes they do have skills while incarcerated, and then when they leave, those skills automatically disappear, or resources, right? So for example, credible messengers. Credible messengers in many states are built into their facilities, their programs, et cetera. And for those who may not be familiar with the term, a credible messenger is essentially what we're talking about up here, right? Somebody who has been previously impacted in this text, right, the criminal system, and has successfully came home and given back to their community in some sort of way where they're able to mentor somebody who shares similar experiences as they do. You get a credible messenger while you're incarcerated, more than likely you come out, you're not gonna have that same connection with that person, right? You're no longer gonna have that mentor that you can go to, run to, that you had as a resource while you were incarcerated. So I think that whole thing of like, they say reentry should start from the day that you go in, right? You should be talking about a reentry plan automatically. What is the plan for the next 12 months, 6 months, however much time you have in here? What do you wanna do by the time you get out? How do you wanna achieve those things? Let's start working on that now. And too often it's, let's focus on your reentry plan 6 weeks before your release, or 2 months before your release, or whatever it may be. So I think those are some of the biggest challenges that I've seen and heard people talking about, aside from the obvious, right? How am I gonna get housing? You have a criminal record, you more than likely can't even get an apartment, at least not in Connecticut. You can't get a job. And if you do get a job, it doesn't pay well, right? All the regular barriers and just inequitable barriers that we reach going through life now, even as people who aren't incarcerated.
Right, and then add on racial and ethnic discrimination, language barriers, and all of a sudden you're now located in a place where you've, on top of regular barriers, you've now got a conviction on your record that will come up with every background check. Right, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So describe how families can help. Like, this is not us all depressing. There's some really good things going on. Right. So talk about what your program does in Chicago to help women coming home, but we know we help women, we help the entire community.
Yes. So one of the things that I'm very proud of GOD that does, based on my own personal experience of coming home with no supports, is we provide an emergency basic needs package. A lot of non-for-profits do amazing work, but as someone who had to return myself, I can't come and sit in your class for 4 hours to heal if I'm worried about the chatter at home. We know that most people going to prison come from a poor community, a underserved, underprivileged, lack of opportunity community. So therefore, right, we're in this space, now we're coming home and we have nothing, right? And our families cannot afford to support another adult who doesn't even have an ID yet. So if we can remove the chatter of when you first come home, you got an ID, they want to know when you're going to get a job. Start putting soap on the shelf, right? You're using too much laundry soap. So we do the basic needs emergency We Win Welcome Home care package. It has all your cleaning supplies, everything you would need when you moved into a house, PPE supplies. For women, we give them 14 interview attire outfits, which turns into 30 days of clothes, 6 pairs of shoes, and the most important thing is the holistic support that's never on a budget line item, right? Sitting and praying with you, talking to you, listening to you, figuring out what the problems are and where we need to direct you to and who do I need to send you to, right? Warm handoffs. So those kind of things are not, ever talked about, but them are the things that are needed. Where's humanity? At the end of the day, we're all human. And just because I made the wrong decision or, was in the wrong space, and I went to prison because I didn't have a lawyer. 98% of people that are in prison go there because of a plea deal. So let's talk about that too. There's a lot of innocent people in prison. There's a lot of survivors in prison. I'm an old B number person. So a lot of the women that I were in prison with are survivors of domestic violence. Back in the day, if you're married, you call the police. The police would come and say, take a walk. They wouldn't arrest him or anything, right? They tell the man to take a walk because you're married. They're not going to get involved. So then when the woman decides to protect herself and it's you trying to kill me and I end up accidentally killing you, now I'm this horrific person that has to be on a violent registry for the rest of my life. I can't live by a school. I can't even go into my kid's school to chaperone. So many things that come of it, but yet they never know your story of why you were put in that position. And these are the things that are dear to me because at the end of the day, when we don't support each other and we're not there to uplift each other, you have to understand when I move you forward, I'm moving my whole community forward. People that are living and thriving in an environment that's full of love and support don't come out here and commit crimes because they don't have to survive. They're not trying to survive. And that's the problem. A lot of our people are locked up for being poor and just trying to survive. We don't talk about that. but yet the structural violence exists, the inequities exist, right? We all understand it. We want to create policies, but yet we don't put people like me in policy-led positions. We always have people that come into our community and say, hey, let me tell you what's good for you. Let me show you what's good for you, instead of asking me. I know what I need. Ask me what I need.
And just to put a fine point on what was just said, in my own research and experience, when we're talking about coming home with nothing, we're talking about coming home with nothing. People are released in cold weather communities in the middle of January with canvas running shoes, one pair of jeans, a couple of t-shirts, a sweatshirt, and been like, see you later. Like there's no collective reentry organization. Some do this. But when you think about, there's a Department of Corrections, there's no Department of Reentry. No one is helping people when they come home getting a wardrobe. So the idea she's giving them a wardrobe matters, because when people are released, they don't have a wardrobe. They don't have everything. A lot of food insecurity with individuals that reentering. So they may commit crimes to feed themselves, to feed their children. Like it's not one of these like, oh, I'm just gonna go deal drugs to make money. It's I need to deal drugs or I need to steal for the money to actually live. So I just want to put that humanity in context. I've interviewed so many people and seen people come home in January in New York and New Jersey. And you already know it's cold. Okay. Fast forwarding, because I'm the moderator, I'm supposed to be keeping track of time. Policy reforms. I had like 5 or 6 other questions about reentry, but I do want to talk about policy reforms because this is the CHCI. We're thinking about elected officials. We're thinking about going back to our communities. We want to talk to people at the local level who are in elected office that write policies, think about policies. So while we go through these last bit of questions, I also want to make sure the audience also will have a chance to ask questions so you can start thinking about those. Paul, we have talked briefly, there's never enough time, about the challenges of incarceration, the challenges of reentry, but I want you to discuss the importance of data. When we talk about the criminal legal system, why is data so important?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, one of the biggest challenges that we have is the fact that there are significant gaps in criminal justice data across the states, and there's specifically a Latino data gap that we need to name and we need to rectify immediately. The Urban Institute did a recent study where they canvassed all of the states, different jurisdictions, to get a sense of what type of data is collected. What they found was that 40 states collect data on just race, but only 15 states collected data on ethnicity. The reasons that is important is because when states fail to collect data on ethnicity, they are making invisible the Latino community, which is commonly categorized as an ethnic group rather than a racial group. And what that translates to into practice is that in these states that only collect by race, they are categorizing people as white, as black, as other. And so a lot of Latinos are being folded into the white categorization. What that does is then it artificially amplifies the rates of white folks represented in criminal justice data while making Latinos virtually inexistent, right? And so we really need to think about how we're tracking this data, how we're disaggregating by race. Policymakers, community advocates cannot, without the data, understand the true significant impacts of the criminal justice system on the Latino community. And what that then translates to is an inability for us to develop policy proposals, legislative recommendations, programs that are directly responding to the unique needs of the Latino community within the criminal justice population.
Just a side note, for those that are in the nonprofit community that write grants, write into your grant the ability to collect data and have someone evaluate the data that you collect for that program. Now, they may say, no, you can't use it. But if we consistently are writing these things into grants, those funders will see it, but like, oh, they want to collect data on Latino youth. Okay, we'll fund that part. But the idea is we need the data that is disaggregated. We need the data on Latinas. We need the data on Latinos. We need their age. We need their ethnicity to be able to then advocate for policies in a different way. Ileana.
Hey.
Hey. What are some best practices that should be implemented for youth?
That's a big question. I think some best practices, I mean, besides the obvious, right? Always, even, and some people don't understand this, but like, have the young person be a part of what their plan is. Stop drafting a plan for a young person and expecting them to abide by it, because they're more than likely not going to. They're so much more likely to successfully complete a plan if they understand what it is. And they'll understand it if they create it. It's like connecting the dots. So I think that would by far be my top thing. My other thing was the one-size-fit-all practices don't work. And I guess I'm supposed to be telling you what's best practice, but what's not best practice is all size fits one, right? And I say this because, well, as you were talking, girl, you remind me of my mother. Let me just, let me tell you that.
Honored.
I'm 24. My mom just turned 40.
I could be your mom.
And recently I went through a situation where my mom was incarcerated. I had to hold the house down. But I've also been holding the house down since I was 14 years old, right? There's not every 14-year-old is holding the house down. 14, 15, 16-year-olds have a lot of different issues. What I might have going on, Tracy might not have going on, or Kim, or whatever the other child is, right? You have to be able to fill the gaps for those kids. At 14, 15, I was bringing in money because my mom couldn't bring in money. So now when you eliminate me out of the equation, you're also screwing over my mother, right? Even, and I don't know what the professions are in the space, right? But even if your profession is not criminal justice, is it housing? Because if it's housing, great. We have a lot of gaps there, right? I mean, even now I struggle with getting an apartment because I was thrown on an eviction when my mother was evicted, and I didn't even live with her. I had my own apartment. My name was just on the mailbox, right? So being conscious of all the different areas where you can support little stuff like that is a huge impact on families. And young people often carry a lot of weight in the homes that people don't recognize, especially nowadays where we have young people bringing in money at 12, 13, whether they're hustling for it, they're working for it, they're got their own little entrepreneurship going on, right? Like, kids just need that support all around. You never know what's going on. I think my last point that I will add is the reentry piece. And that's not to say diversion is not extremely important, right? We should be doing everything possible to divert a kid from a system. But for those who have already gotten sucked into the hole of the legal system and eventually will be reentering, we have to continue to provide wraparound supports. A 6-month, 18-month, 24-month expectation and program is not always enough. And that doesn't mean check their ankle monitor every however many days. It doesn't mean that they have probation guidelines to abide by. It means they need support longer than 2 years. And when you're 18, you don't just magically become an adult and no longer need the support. That carries on through the age of 25, through the age of 30, and so on and so forth. And I say that as a hot mess 24-year-old who's like, I can't believe I asked earlier, I said, Hala, how'd you find me? Hala, how'd you find me? She said, Google. And I was in the back of my mind like, somebody found me on Google. I never thought I would be here. This is crazy, right? But you have to be able to support young people.
So to finish up, I would like each panelist, starting with Paul, and then we will end with Celia, because you have all the things that this panel talked about, all the experiences. Yes. But a success story. Let's leave on a success story note, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions.
Great, yeah. So one thing that I want to spotlight is there are a lot of people, Celia, Ileana included, that are leading this idea, this concept of reimagining what citizenship means and who has access to it and the many benefits that it provides. There are some really spotlight campaigns that are happening throughout the country that are trying to remove barriers to accessing government IDs, driver's licenses. There are campaigns like we saw in Florida in 2018 that are re-granting access to the right to vote for folks who have criminal records. In Florida, right, with this ballot measure, we saw 1.4 million Floridians be re-enfranchised into this idea of citizenship. So we really want to challenge this notion of citizenship, and it's important to remember that citizenship is malleable, and the problem is that the people who get to define what citizenship is and who has access to it do not look like the people in this room. They haven't for many, many years. So what we need to do is to replace those people. We need each of you to run for office. We need each of you to serve in appointed boards and commissions. so that we can really reimagine a citizenship and a democracy that is inclusive of communities of color, of justice-impacted people, and of immigrant communities.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Amen.
Ileana, success story. You.
I probably should have saved my last comments. What you see up here, this is a success story. I mean, I encourage people to always look for their own success story. I'm not good at highlighting success. I don't even do enough good reflection on myself. I'm a critic at heart. It's just what I do. Google Google what's going, what's happening. There's
Ileana needs to Google herself.
There's young people doing this work in probably every state that's represented in this space. And if that isn't a success story, I don't know what it is. There's people like Celia across the states. If you don't know any, find some in your local jurisdiction. I mean, this isn't something rare up here. There's young people who have been incarcerated in the system that are starting to take over the work. Amen. And that is what should be done. That is what should be common. So I don't mean to be funny when I say Google your own success story, but really check out what's going on around you. Yep. What organizations exist, what young leaders are in the space, what leaders like the people that are up here are in the space, connect with them, get something moving, do the work excitingly, but in partnership with people who are actually impacted by these systems we're trying to undo.
I would like to say, first, we need to end permanent punishments. My case happened 27 years ago, but yet I'm always re-traumatized. I have to constantly prove that I'm worthy to live on this planet and have the same human experience as each one of you. I want y'all to raise your hand if you were the same person you were last year or 5 years ago. No one is, right? We're water, we're always evolving, we're always transforming. So why can't somebody with a record who made a mistake, who made a wrong decision, have that same human experience? When we start caring about each other and loving each other and supporting each other and deciding that prevention is the key to saving humanity. At the end of the day, we all want to live peacefully. We all want to live and have opportunities to have a very successful life. Everybody does. Nobody's different than that, right? We all want that same shared value. Success stories for me, I've been able to help women. I have a couple businesses. So I run 3 businesses. One of them grosses over 6 figures, so.
Yes.
I'm very proud to, because I had to struggle and tech support was always my biggest supporter for everything that I did. I help people open up their own businesses, right? There's a blueprint and there's a system to success. Mm-hmm. So you gather yourself around people that are innovative and that inspire you, that move you forward, or they're constantly pouring into you so that you can pour into the next. Just like our VP said today. Yes, I've done all these things, and you can Google me, but it's about who are you sharing and giving that baton to, right? Because the work that we're all doing here today is work that we know we might not see, right? It's that tree that we're planting that we might not sit underneath that shade, but my babies will.
Excellent. Yep, thank you. So, audience, do you have members for our fabulous panelists? Questions for our fabulous panelists? Yes.
Come on over to the mic, young girl, so we can hear you. Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Does the mic work?
Yeah, it should be.
Oh, our tech person is fabulous. Go ahead.
I'm Natalie. I'm a fellow with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development based in Chicago. So
Hey.
I have a question for Paul. He spoke on the alternatives. More like, what is the boundary to letting someone be participate in an alternative program? Or I guess kind of like what qualifies someone to be there rather than being incarcerated?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to this question of political will, because a lot of these programs were innovated in cities and jurisdictions where there was an interest by local community leaders, by directly impacted folks in having these viable alternatives. These programs aren't feasible in every jurisdiction, unfortunately, because often the ranks of leadership don't see the humanity of people who are impacted by the justice system and don't believe that there should be alternatives to the criminal justice system. So really, a lot of the eligibility is dependent on what that local community believes to be the right path for somebody who is affected by the justice system, by interactions with law enforcement. But it really is, the onus is on leaders like yourself, like the folks in this room, to champion these innovative strategies, the best thing to note is that there is precedent. This has been done in other parts of the country. There are models that are operating right now that are far and beyond more successful than the rates that we're seeing of folks leaving the justice system. And so we need to uplift those practices and know that there is examples that we can lean on to implement these strategies locally.
And just to know, well, someone else wants to ask a question and they come to the microphone, please don't hesitate. The restrictions the panelists were talking about are embedded in laws. They're collectively known as the collateral consequences of a felony conviction. So we have laws at the federal level, state level, and local level that restrict people from actually accessing public benefits, public housing, Pell Grants, all the policies.
First, I wanted to say thank you guys so much for sharing your story. And I think it's really interesting having a personal perspective, a nonprofit organization, and also the policy perspective. I personally want to pursue a career in law, and I interned for the public defender's office. I'm from Colorado. And one thing that I worked on was in the state of Colorado, we are one of 14 states that have a thing called direct file. That means it's giving the complete power of the prosecutors to determine whether a child is going to be tried as an adult. This means that anywhere from 14 and up, over 80% of them would be charged as an adult, and usually it's going to be for a lower class felony. But one thing I noticed from working previously in a nonprofit and then working in this public sector is that there is a large gap between nonprofit organizations, the public sector, and the private sector. And so coming from a policy background and from a nonprofit background, how do you think we can go back to our communities and start to bridge that gap that is not only missing data, but communication, objectives between nonprofits and that public and private sector?
Public service announcement. Prosecutors are elected. So you must, in lots of states, so you must register to vote and check out who is running as prosecutor.
I'd like to, my thing is to have people who are impacted be a part of the solution. I always say people closest to the problem are closer to the solution. We're just further from the resource and the power. In Chicago right now, there's 13 aldermen who have retired. Even my alderwoman said, Celia, run, I'll support you. I can't run because of my conviction. There's so many things that we are not even allowed or even asked to participate in these spaces. That's why there's such a disconnect, because they want you to have, whatever education, they want you to not have a criminal background to even get into the room, right? So you're already cutting off a whole generation of people. And one thing that I do want to talk about the generational harm, just because it's something that happened to my coworker. Not only does it affect us, it affects our children. So I have a friend, his young man from Roseland, which is a very highly violent side of Chicago, graduated at the top of his class. There's a lot of Black women missing in Chicago that nobody talks about, being murdered and just missing. So this young man, his whole life, worked to become an FBI agent because he wants to discover and find out why all his aunts and mothers and sisters are missing, right? Because he's a young Black man. Well, he passed the physical, he passed the mental health, but when it came to background, he was denied the opportunity to join the force because his uncle was a convicted felon. So when we're talking about generational harms, we're taking opportunities away from people that are innocent. And at the end of the day, there's thousands of children who are paying the debts that they do not owe, right? They're paying with their innocent lives for debts that they do not owe. I personally had my case sealed, but when my daughter graduated from 8th grade, they told me that I could not chaperone, that I could not attend the 8th grade graduation, blah, 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 blah. I'm not your typical mother. I told them I was bringing every journalist that I knew, that I was gonna chain myself to the front of their school. My baby was not wearing my number. And guess what they said? Miss Cologne, you can come, but don't tell nobody. And that's
Question? Oh, we are on a hard stop here. I'm sorry, but thank you very much to the panelists.
Can I add just one thing? Anybody that wants to know how to end the punishment after the punishment, Google Fully Free.
fully free.
Fully
campaign.
Free is an organization, a campaign to end the punishment after the punishment. We're in Illinois. We've already serviced 13 cities in Illinois. Our base is close to 100,000 people. But if you want to end the punishment after the punishment, visit their website fully free, or just talk to Celia and me. We sit on the governing board.
Thank you. And thank you for attending. Really appreciate you.